Good. See you. See you.
Yep.
All right, good.
Yep, fine. All right. So, Shavua Tov, everyone. Thank you for this final opportunity. So I'm gonna speak for about, say, half an hour or so, and happy to open up for questions, comments. Also, throughout, if there's anything that you want to clarify, feel free to do so. More than happy to. I'm sure that anyone who looked at the title probably didn't know what I was trying to say at all, because I mean we kind of know what OCD is, we kind of know what PTSD is, but why am I juxtaposing the two? Why am I claiming that the two areas are in some ways disparate? Like what about it? What about those areas would lend themselves to that? So that's actually what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about OCD, talk a little bit about PTSD, explain what those things look like on a halachic level, and then you'll see that the two actually are opposites. And when I train rabbis and Magle Nefesh, my organization, the first thing that we started doing was to do rabbinic training. This is a central piece, not specifically with OCD, PTSD, but with everything. In other words, to understand that any mental health condition might require tweaking the way that the rabbi will actually interact with the person and paskin for the person. Because with rabbis, I know my colleagues, yeah, they're good people, right? Sure, once in a while we hear like the terrible story about this rabbi and that rabbi, he did this and did that. Most rabbis are great people, wonderful people who try to help, spend hours and hours of their free time to do so, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of times, even very well-meaning rabbis will actually hurt more than help because they don't necessarily understand the material, don't understand the metzias, the reality, the people that they're dealing with, and once again, the nuance that you need to sometimes take into account when paskening on a specific issue. Okay, so that is the kind of like the broad introduction. And now let's go into it. OCD is a fairly well-known condition. I think people more or less are familiar with OCD. They understand what that is. But it's important to understand that when it comes to halacha and OCD, psak needs to be very straightforward. It needs to be very black and white. It needs to be very, very clear. A lot of clarity needs to be put into the psak. I always say, like when I paskin for OCD, there are no opinions. I don't say, oh, there are 3 opinions about this. There's no opinions with OCD. There's no machlok. It's not machloket. You know, Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. There's no machloket. No. There's one opinion. This is what you do, right? If you start going into details, it's a problem. In fact, I generally veer away from any sort of explanation. Now, you've been to Shiur. You know that Rabbanim like to shower you with sources. You know, and the reason Rabbanim like to do that is because they want you to understand. They like explaining things. We like explaining things. We like showing you what the sources are from the Torah, from the Gemara, from the Halacha. It's a machloket rishonim. This is how it comes to play in the Achronim. Now you'll understand why he says this and he says that, etc., etc., etc. We like doing those things. We like educating. We like explaining. And 100%, in many cases, that's a wonderful thing. But with OCD, it creates havoc. It does exactly the opposite of what you want to do. Let me give you an example. I have several people over the years have reached out to me with OCD with regards to vowing, the darim. So the person basically thinks that every thought that goes through their head is a neder, is a vow. That's what they think. Every thought that they have, I basically agreed. I now have committed. I've committed to doing this. I've committed to doing that. I've committed to doing that. You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So every thought that they have, they think is a neder. One time someone called me and told me, what do I do with this? And then he added, I asked another Rav. The Rav gave me an answer. It wasn't good for me. It was terrible. I said, okay, what was the answer the Rav gave you? The Rav told me that not to worry, because if I was kol nidre, if I was in shul, When I heard it, it's good. It covers everything, and that, I'm good to go. So I said, now I understand what the problem is. Because what happens with OCD? When you give someone a reason for why they're doing what is, then the OCD starts picking at the reason. Now the doubt that comes with OCD is like, well, was I in shul? I wasn't shul. Did I hear every word of Kol Nidre, or did I not hear every word? And even if I did hear every word, was he mechaven on me? Was he not mechaven on me? Et cetera, right? So now the person has all kinds of doubts that come with that. Okay, so every single time you give a reasoning, then the person their mind will start picking apart at the reason. Now, once again, some people will do this more, some people will do this less. But with OCD, many times I say, in that Shaila, for example, I said, don't worry. Any thought you have doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. There's no halachic meaning to any thought that you have. By the way, the Stipler, Yaakov Kanievsky, already wrote this in Karyana de Igrita. He has a letter, that he wrote to a psychologist where he says, tell the guy, like there's no problem whatsoever. I think he even says it in the name of the Brisker Rav, that, and he goes even further because he had a really, I guess he had a really good understanding of it. He said, even if he says that he's motzi b'sfatav, even if he says that he's saying it, not just a thought, even if he says it, tell him it's nothing. It's just nothing. That's all. That's how you have to say it. You have to say to people, it's just nothing. Because it's unbidden. It's not piva libo shavim, as the Gemara in Nazir says. It's not that, everything is like, you mean it, you intend it. The person doesn't know what he intends a lot of times. He doesn't know what he means. He thinks all kinds of things and he says all kinds of things. It's once again, sometimes not even under control. In those situations, you would not say, right, that the issue, but once again, I'm not going to be quoting the Gemara in Netarim. I'm not going to be quoting the Gemara in Nazir. I'm not going to be quoting all those rules. I'm just going to tell the person, look, it's okay. No, even if nothing, anytime anything happened, you can assume that it's fine. You can assume that it's okay. It's the same thing with kashrus, okay? OCD and kashrus. So once again, I have a very difficult case right now that I'm dealing with a young woman who is suffering terribly. It's literally, I'm telling you, it's like the worst case of OCD I've ever seen. I've seen hard cases. This one is like over and above everything that I've ever seen. I haven't seen anything like this. So she says to me, right? I'm afraid that I'm eating bugs. So you're probably thinking salad, maybe. No, that's not the shaila. Her shaila was she's in the shower. You ever heard a kashrus question starts with I'm in the shower? She's in the shower. Okay, maybe there's a bug in the shower. The water's very hot, so it's cooking the bug. Now the water is maybe, spritzing into my mouth, so then I'm tasting something that's not kosher, right? That's not a shaila. That's OCD, right? Now I can answer this in two ways, right? I can make a halachic argument to her. I can say to her, nothing to worry about. Why nothing to worry about? Because the bug, it's noten tam lefgam, so there's no good taste over here. And anyway, even if there was, it's batal b'shishim, it's canceled in 60 of the water. I can make that calculation halachically and tell her there really is no issue over here, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a mistake. Why is that a mistake? For two reasons. Number one, we're playing into the OCD thoughts. This is not even a shaila, really. It's only in her mind it's a shaila. So first of all, we should not give any credence to the OCD thoughts and tell her, actually, good question, but here's the reason why it's cool. Yeah, no, not good question. And we shouldn't think that way, and we shouldn't encourage the person to think in those terms, right? So definitely we don't do that. But beyond that, if I ever actually told her that halachic reasoning, she'd pick at it. She'd pick it apart. She'd like, well, how do I know there's 60 in the water? How do I know? Maybe it's a good tasting bug. Maybe it's not ten tam with gam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She asked me before Pesach. She said to me, she afraid she eats chametz. So why? Chametz oser b'mashu. Right? Chametz, even a little tiny bit. It's not batal in anything. So there are like molecules of chametz in the air. Maybe I open my mouth, I swallow something. So I said to her, at the beginning, this was like one of the first questions she asked me. I didn't understand how bad her OCD was. So I said to her, look, how about this? Okay, how about this as a rule? If you're not actually taking something and stuffing it in your mouth, then you're not eating chametz. She said, what do you mean? I said, if you don't have kavanah to do it, it's not a problem. I said, how do I know if I have kavanah? What do you mean, how do you know? Don't we all know if we have kavanah? She doesn't know, right? In her mind, it's a doubt. Maybe this time I opened my mouth on purpose to swallow something. Maybe this time I am doing it, et cetera, right? So for her, the OCD will pick apart at the reasoning. If I gave her a reason, in a sense, I gave her like some sort of criteria, like if it's on purpose, that didn't help. For her, that only made things worse because now she's thinking, well, if I have kavanah, then I guess it's a problem. Maybe I have kavanah every second. Now it's a problem. To be clear, I think most OCD is not this bad. I've seen other cases, they're okay. They can handle certain things. But there needs to be, I'm using this very extreme example to show you, there needs to be a lot of clarity and no room for error or for the doubt to like creep in, to deal with this in order to be able to answer someone in these scenarios. I need to say a caveat on this. That's not good in general, right? And I said this on Shabbos, while paskening can be a solution to one's distress, but not a solution to the actual problem, it's important to realize that we as rabbis need to not fall into the trap of thinking that the halachic solution, if it's clear and helps a person, is the solution to the OCD. It's actually the opposite of the solution to the OCD. The solution to OCD is learning how to live with doubt. It's not eliminating all doubt. Right? Many times halachists, if they understand OCD, will supply an answer that eliminates all doubt, which is the way to go. Because if not, you're feeding the doubt and you're feeding the OCD and the person's not well. But long term, that's also not a great solution. Because eliminating all doubt is not living with the doubt. We all live with the doubt. We all, every day we do things and maybe this, maybe that, right? And we live with that. We're like, okay, could be like this, could be like that. But someone with OCD has a problem living with that. So if we give halachic answers that are very clear, it will help them get through the day. But it will not necessarily be the correct answer for their OCD. The real answer for OCD is to learn how to live with doubtful situations, not to eliminate all doubt from their lives. Bottom line, okay, if I take everything I said, the bottom line is that with OCD, you need to give answers that won't exacerbate the person's situation, okay? And answers that lack clarity will many times exacerbate the doubt, exacerbate the feelings, etc. So you need to give clear and crisp responses. One last thing before you ask, and once again, I also say no machlokes. You say, there's 3 opinions on this. Okay, so now what are the person supposed to do? Even if you tell them, do this, do that, a lot of times, okay, now what about the other opinions? So you understand, right? That's what OCD. Yes.
Rabbanim many times to give a share on ribbis, to give a share on many topics, and they will introduce different sides, and the person with OCD will take it, and there'll be a field day of OCD problems. Right. So why don't Rabbanim announce after they give a share, the halacha is at the end of it, period. The shiur is good, but this is the halacha. So that people can take that and understand the halacha is finite.
Yeah. First of all, I think many Rabbanim will present some sort of a bottom line at the end. I think that many Rabbanim do that. But, I'm not saying that from now on, any Rabb that ever gives a shiur needs to assume there are people with OCD in the crowd and therefore, craft the shiur in accordance with that. I mean, we can still give an ear to shiur once in a while. We can still teach the complexities of halacha, etc. But you're right that if a person knows, certainly if we know that there's someone in the crowd that needs that, it's important to be aware of it and to cater to it. That's for sure. Yeah.
How do you go through the normal, process of learning without perhaps triggering that style of
You mean if a person already has OCD?
Yeah. And we're not talking about necessarily not getting there, but you're spending time you're learning.
Depends on the severity of the OCD. Some people with OCD can handle a certain level of complexity and it doesn't trigger, not every little thing triggers. I gave some of the more extreme examples here just to drive home the point. Yeah, but there'll be differing levels. of OCD with different people, and the same one can handle a certain level of complexity and be okay with it. But it will depend on the person. If it's affecting the person adversely or very adversely, whatever you want to call it, yeah, you're right. Maybe, honestly, maybe learning Yun at this point is not for them. Once again, they actually need to learn how to control the OCD, right? So hopefully, with care, medication, therapy, et cetera, they'll be able to acquire tools and abilities, yes, to keep it under control, and yes, to be able to engage in Torah in its full scope. But honestly, yeah, there are some people, absolutely, that I tell them. There was someone, even when I was here, there was someone on Shabbos who asked me a question about, let's say, Kabbalah. He said to me, in Kabbalah, there's all these kavanos, all these things. I said to him, stay away from that. If you have OCD, that's not for you to start thinking, but maybe my kavana is not perfect. Maybe what about this kavana? What about that kavana? I read in this book, I read in that book, okay, that's too much for forget that. Don't engage with those things. Don't interact with those things. It's not for you. It could be that if everything is under control, then you can then read some Kabbalic book and you can think about Olamota El Yoni, et cetera, you can wonderful. But some things are not for all people. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Not from the rabbi side, but from the friend, the spouse side. Where do we see the difference between chumrah, people that like taking chumras upon themselves, and someone that has OCD? Where is that line?
Right. So it's a great question. Sometimes people ask me that also. If someone repeats words in davening, right? Let's say they read that they need to have kavanah, let's say in the first pasuk of Shema, right? So then the person says Shema, and he thinks maybe I didn't have the proper kavanah. So then he repeats Shema again. He says maybe I didn't have the proper kavanah. He does it again, right? So when is that OCD? And when do we say that guy is just like a really pious, righteous person? He wants to do the right thing. He's trying to, look, when I was in yeshiva at Shiur Aleph, so I used to do a mishmar every Thursday night. I tried to stay up all night, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, was that OCD behavior, or was that just me being a good yeshiva guy? Is every single thing that's done to an extreme automatically means OCD? Of course not, right? Some people are just really, really into things, and that's okay to be into something. And if a person wants to have proper kavanah and Shema, he wants to say it a few times to make sure that he gets it. On the face of it, there's no indication that that's OCD. So the rabbi is correct. When do we say this and when do we say that? There could be several litmus tests for that, but I think the best one is to ask a simple question, right? Is the person suffering, or are they not suffering when they're doing it? So in other words, OCD is a situation where a person many times is suffering. In other words, they can't stop until they get it right? So they can't move on. They want to move on. Everyone's already gone to breakfast, and I'm stuck here saying Shema for the 150th time, because otherwise my brain will explode. So therefore, I have to say it again and again until I get it just right. In the same way, by the way, non-religious OCD works, right? Like turning on and off lights again and again and again and again until get it just right, or closing the door, just right, et cetera, until I feel like, okay, it's closed the way I wanted it to close, and I heard it click the way I wanted it to click, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Those individuals, they want to go to work. They don't want to be opening and closing the door 100 times. But if they don't do it, it's going to bother them all day, right? So that individual has OCD. But a lot of people, they enjoy it. They're happy to go over the sugya another time and another time, or to say another time, et cetera. It makes them feel elated. It makes them feel happy. And if they need to stop, they can stop. In other words, if someone says, okay, ad kan, I said, okay, fine. Maybe you're right. I'll leave this for today. I'll do it. That's not OCD. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What percentage of the population have OCD?
Wow, I don't. I don't remember. I don't remember the percentages. Does anybody know here? I don't know. I don't remember the percentages. Rabbi's going to look it up.
Honey's our fact checker this year.
Okay.
She's a fact checker. She'll get back to you in a few seconds.
Wonderful. So someone will.
She has OCD.
So my people are looking into it, and they're going to have that information for you in a second. But 100%. Yeah.
So say your God dies, what am I supposed to do if I know somebody's OCD?
I mean, it's a very general question, so I don't know the answer.
It's usually like seeds, or, they want to die for something, it's not 2 weeks. That's
okay. I mean, yeah.
70% globally.
2 to 3% globally.
2 to 3.
2 to 3% globally. Look, people with OCD. Look, I want to say something, okay, about OCD. And if someone has OCD, they usually know that they have it. In other words, there's a difference in OCD. Okay, I mean this is like a bit of a tangent, but I'll just quickly say it. Okay, there's a difference in OCD and OCPD. All right, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. OCPD is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. What's the difference between OCD and OCPD? The answer is a lot of times someone with OCPD, if it's a personality disorder, it's part of their personality, right? So they're not always aware even that they have it. They might actually see it as justified. They think that what they're doing makes sense, right? But someone with OCD, not a personality disorder, but it's just a condition that they have, they may times be aware that what they're doing is over the top, right? So you'll say, you just washed your hands for the 10th time. They won't be like, I'm weird. Why did you only wash your hand once? They're like, that's not going to be the response. The response is going to be, yes, I know, 100%. I can't stop. Like, I have to do this, because it's really hard for me not to do this, so I need to do this thing, right? They're aware that what they're doing is over the top. They're aware that what they're doing is not the norm, right? So someone who comes to you and has OCD, many times, you can reason with that person. It's not like they're unreasonable. You can reason. You can explain to them. This is coming from an OCD place. That this is not necessary, etc. They're not going to freak out. They're not going to lose it because you said that to them. They'll be like, okay, etc. If they have OCD, if they're public about it, is what I'm going to say. And things like that. But if it's a person who's problematic, then okay, then you have to either if you have to be like postpone, push them, aside for a bit, or give them a reason why it's not yet relevant or whatever it is. Or if all else fails, you can always just turn them over to the rabbi, and the rabbi will have to deal with it. That's always the best way. Yeah.
If you notice that you have OCD, is there something you can do? It's just starting.
If someone has OCD, they should definitely avail themselves of therapy. There are so many good therapies for OCD. In other words, it is one of the any disorder is not great to have, but if you're going to have a disorder, OCD, there are actually a lot of avenues for you to chase up. So so great. You know what I'm saying? There's what's called the gold standard is what's called ERP, which is a form of CBT, meaning ERP is exposure and response prevention. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So ERP basically trains a person, as I said, to live with a doubt.
The OCD is higher than OCD.
Okay, 6.5% for OCPD. Okay. Well, like I said, OCPD personality disorders are always more complicated because there is no medication for a personality. Yeah, it's just who you are, and therefore, when you can't medicate, then all you're left with is therapy, and therapy is hit and miss. OCPD is always a little bit complicated. Anyway, whatever. But with OCD, okay, if you have OCD, you should, in a sense, count your blessings. Like there are a lot of good things you can do for OCD, and someone who sees that that's what's going on, they should get it. They should get therapy. There's a lot of good stuff, and it can make your life much better very quickly. Like sometimes, if CBT works, it works really quickly. Within like 4 to 6 weeks, you can see changes. Et cetera, et cetera. It's really fantastic. So definitely something that I would recommend seeing someone for. Don't let yourself suffer. Okay, last question questions about OCD, and then we'll move on to PTSD. Yes.
Is there a typical age for the onset?
Another question I don't know the answer to. Is there a typical onset? It could happen. It could happen also in young. Yes, 100%. But when exactly I don't know. These are questions for mental health professionals to tell you. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the answer.
The way you described it before, it sounded like an individual
Right, 100%. Right. So, PTSD. I wanna explain the difference then of PTSD. Okay, with PTSD, it's exactly the opposite. But first, I want to explain to you a little bit about PTSD, just so that you have some basic facts about PTSD. Okay, and here I do have a little bit of the facts that you probably would be interested in. First of all, I think there's a misunderstanding about PTSD which I need to correct. Okay, post-trauma is not the same as trauma. Okay, those are two different things. A lot of people say to me, oh, in Israel, because of the war, and especially after October 7th, everyone's probably, has PTSD, which is not true. Okay, not true at all. In Hebrew, we say Medina betrauma, right? The whole country is in trauma. Yeah, we live in a trauma, like a bubble, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a difference between trauma and post-trauma. We have to understand this. A trauma can happen, okay? It happens to a lot of people. I read somewhere just lately, 70% of people, I'm surprised if it's only 70%, who go through trauma, right? About 10 years ago, I forget already how many years it's been, right? My parents divorced. Okay, is that a trauma? I suppose. Yeah, I wasn't, a little kid, but it's a trauma, right? People go through traumas. Things happen in your life like they shake you up, right? People go through traumas. It doesn't have to be, God forbid, rape or or losing a friend in the war, or all kinds of other things, right? When something shakes up your world, it could be traumatic. A lot of people go through trauma. And honestly, for a lot of people, it's no big deal. They manage to get through it. They take the trauma, they manage to digest it, and move on from it, and basically incorporate it into their current being, into their current mindset, into everything that's going on. Right? They're able to do that. It's not like, oh, now I'm completely disoriented and this and this and that. No, you take the trauma, you think about it, you work through it, et cetera, and you're fine. There's a word we use today: resilience, chosem in Hebrew. Resilience. People are resilient. Most people are resilient. Okay? So therefore, if a person goes through a trauma, they're going to be okay. Most chances are that they're going to be fine. Those who aren't fine, that's post-trauma. Okay? Trauma is not in and of itself the biggest deal in the world. Like I said, a lot of people, most people, go through trauma at one point or another. But it's okay. They come out the other side, they're healthy, they're happy, they deal with it. However, those who aren't, they're going through post-trauma. What are the numbers? About 7-8%, as far as I know. Generally, we say for like post-trauma, meaning out of the individuals that go through a traumatic event, approximately 7-8% will develop post-trauma. Trauma is not terrible. Post-trauma is pretty terrible. Okay, that is a terrible thing. One last thing before you ask. Okay, post-trauma is pretty terrible. Out of the people who develop post-trauma, we can divide those two into two halves. So one half will be able to go through a process of learning and skill building and therapy, et cetera, which eventually will help them come out the other side and hopefully, be able to function normally or semi-normally, et cetera. The other half of those with post-trauma will not. They will be suffering maybe their entire lives, okay, with the post-trauma. Okay, that's more or less what we're talking about. Yeah.
Somebody suffered trauma, handled it, and 5 years later, something similar, that recall of what happened, and that given person goes.
Yes, someone who goes through a trauma and then later on another trauma happens or of a similar nature, or maybe even not of a similar nature, it could trigger the person and create kind of like, I don't know if to call it a cascade effect, but yes, could cause something which eventually, leads them down to a bad place. For sure. Yeah, that could definitely happen. We also have something called CPTSD, complex post-trauma, right? CPTSD is basically a case where it wasn't an isolated event, but let's say someone who is, constantly abused, right? So in other words, they're in a relationship, they're constantly abused. Okay, so if that's true, if that happens again and again over months or years, that's complex post-trauma, right? It becomes a much more difficult situation and a whole different kind of like definition. But yes, but also what you're saying is correct, that if a person has one trauma, it doesn't do anything, later on another trauma, could be, yes, 100%. Okay, yeah.
If a person claims this condition, does that mean he really doesn't have it?
If a person claims he has PTSD, does that mean he doesn't have PTSD?
Yes.
Why?
So basically, he's coping with it.
No, he could know that he has it and not be and still be coping with it. I mean, like that, or not coping with it. Like PTSD is not a situation where you can't talk about it or be aware of it. You can be all those things and still be suffering greatly. 100%, 100%. Okay, so post-trauma is terrible. Okay, it automatically, by definition, implies loss of functionality. You should know if someone has a diagnosis of PTSD, that automatically implies that they have a certain loss of functionality. In halachic speak, I would say they're a chol she'en bo sakana minimum. And if it's in an extreme situation, then a lot of times suicidality, self-harm, all kinds of things, dissociation, which basically means that you're not completely in the moment. Sometimes you could even like lose consciousness completely. Sometimes it's not you don't lose consciousness, but it's like you're walking in a dream. Instead of you're not cognizant of everything that's going on around you. Flashbacks, which I think everyone knows what flashbacks are. So that sort of thing. These are terrible, terrible symptoms. Terrible, terrible symptoms. Which, once again, I mean, flashbacks. If a person is going back to the event, right, where God forbid they were once again raped or lost a friend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can understand why these people become suicidal. It's not doesn't take brain surgery to figure out. Yeah.
You know what percentage of people who went firsthand to October 7th have PTSD?
What are you asking? If I know what?
What percentage of people who went through October 7th
develop PTSD?
Yeah.
PTSD. So October 7th is a specific event, right? And of a greater magnitude. Therefore, the 7-8% that I said before, right, rises when it comes to an event of that magnitude. The percentages balloon a little bit. Last I checked, I thought it was around 14-15%. Yeah, that's what happened over there, from what I know. So almost double, I think, the regular percentages, right? We had in October 7th, and it's okay. Fine. I want to keep to the times, so I just want to say a few last things, and then we'll finish. Unless you have questions. What does that mean for the halachas? With OCD, I told you that I try not to give anyone any reasons. I try to keep it simple, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With PTSD, the opposite is correct. It's exactly the opposite. Because what does a person who has gone through a trauma feel? When you go through a trauma, you feel a loss of agency, a loss of free will, right? You couldn't control the situation. I keep on mentioning rape. Rape is an extreme example of that, right? Someone who was raped had no ability to deal with the situation in a good way, right? So what happened. But it's true also in war, right? You went into an ambush and your friends got killed and you couldn't do anything about it, right? So a person feels a loss of agency, a loss of control. What you want to return to that person is that feeling of control. That's what you want to do with PTSD, to give them a sense of agency, that they have a role to play. It's actually difficult for someone with PTSD to necessarily come and put their life, put their fate, put their halachic decision-making even in the hands of a rabbi. Because once again, they are giving up agency. They are giving up control, right? And the rabbi would, in this situation, I think, should be aiming to give back that control to the person. So actually, if someone with PTSD asked me a question, I would try and give them a lot of opinions rather than just one opinion. I would say, hey, you know what? Why don't we make the decision together? Instead of me kind of like laying it on you, here's what you must do. Yeah? Sometimes it's better to come and say, you know what? There are 4 opinions, there are 5 opinions. What do you think works best for you? What do you think you can handle? What makes sense in your situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Return the agency, give the agency back to the individual so that they can decide. Of course, you're making sure that it's within a halachic framework and that the opinions are legitimate. But yeah, I would really open it up for someone with PTSD and have them make the decision, or with me, I don't mind. Yeah, but not to take it away from them again, to say, okay, I'm going to control your situation. Sometimes they want that, okay, but usually, a lot of times I've seen, they don't want that. They want the ability to understand the material, understand the reality, and be able to maneuver right within that to the extent that they can. The last thing,
Rabbi,
okay, and then either you can ask questions or we can adjourn. The last thing I'll say is this. Another thing that I've seen with PTSD is that people want to get back. They want to come back to their lives, but they can't exactly come back to their lives. They're back, but they're not back. And I'll explain what this means because I think it's maybe the most important thing that I can tell you about PTSD. And I'll give you an example for my son who doesn't have PTSD. Okay, Yitzhak, my son, was in Gaza. Not at the beginning. He wasn't yet that space in his army training that he could be there. But later on, much later on, a year and a half or so, maybe into the war, they sent him and everyone into Gaza. He was there for 3 months. He came out fine, Baruch Hashem, everything is okay. As far as I can see, he seems like he's all good. So no worries about it. However, I did feel like something really weird about it. Like he would come home from once in a while, not often, right, every 3 weeks or whatever it is, but, maybe even more than that. He would come home from Gaza. And when he came home, everything was normal, like for us. In other words, we still take out the garbage. We still do the dishes. We still clean up the living room. We still have to go to the store, right? And Yitzhak, when he came home, like sometimes we would ask him to do like all these like little tasks, right? He would say, "Okay, Yitzhak, can you take care of this? Can you take care of that?" It was like a bit. When I started thinking about it, but it was a bit weird. Like 2 seconds ago, he was in like this other planet, like he was in like this other place where, like you could be killed any second, and anything could happen, et cetera. Maybe there's an ambush, coming your way or whatever it is, et cetera. And then you're home and it's like nothing's changed, right? If you've ever been to Israel, you know how it is. Like we live in a war zone, but it's not a war zone. You know what I'm saying? Like on the one hand, everyone wants to kill us, but when you're actually living like your everyday life, it's like a regular situation. Like there's no, like the routine is just routine. We've gotten so used to it that we don't live as if 2 seconds away from us, or people want to kill us. So it's a bit of a strange thing, really. Yitzhak doesn't have PTSD, but imagine the same situation for someone who does. They just went through something extremely, extremely potent, right? They went through some sort of unbelievable experience that has changed everything about them. They come home, and what do we expect them to do? Whatever they did before they went. Now you have to be a father. Now you have to be a husband. Now you have to go to work, do all the regular chores. You have to slide back into the life you had before. But can they really? So once again, my son could do it. But those who have PTSD, they want to slide back into their previous lives. But it's not so simple to slide in back to your previous life because things have changed, because it's not the same for you, right? And that causes huge stresses and huge problems within the marriage and within the family life, and really, really not simple things. I will give you one example of that, just so that you understand what I'm talking about. I got a call from someone in my community. He was first 4 months, he was in Gaza, barely went home. Mamash at the beginning of the war. Saw terrible things, went through terrible things, lost friends, terrible, Mamash terrible, had PTSD, developed PTSD, very bad. Went home and just was not himself. Mamash not himself. And he just, like he could be, like he didn't do anything. He didn't go back to work. He didn't help around the house. He didn't shower the kids. He didn't, nothing. Nothing was happening, okay? And the wife was carrying the entire family, right? And I always say, like with mental health, it's not just the individual. When the individual has a mental health condition, the entire family suffers. You see that again and again and again. It's like, it's never contained, okay? And also in this situation, the whole family was suffering greatly. a year and a half after the war started, he gave me a call. He told me this whole story. He said, he's been going to therapy and trying to get it sorted out, but it's like very, very hard. Everything's very, very hard. And his wife is like completely shattered and just, like it's nothing, everything is rocky in the house and to a very large extent. And one of the things that they were really dealing with was also the romantic sexual relationship between him and his wife. And he explained it to me, he said, it's not that I'm not interested in her sexually, it's that I don't even notice her. It's not that I don't want to be with her. She's not in my field of vision. I'm like in a bubble, like I have my own world. I'm not in touch with anything that's outside that bubble. So therefore, we have very little contact. And that, once again, she's carrying the entire house. And on top of that, he's not really paying any attention to her. And we're trying to work on that, he says to me. But it's very, very difficult. And one of the difficulties was Nida. One of the difficulties was that she had a very short menstrual period. So since she was keeping what we call Shiva Nekiim, 7 clean days. So until she got to mikvah, and et cetera, et cetera. And then by the time she was already okay, then it was only a few days, and then she had to go. Then again, she was Nida, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this was causing, basically they couldn't come back to each other. Basically there was no time that they could work on their relationship, in that sense. And that was taking a huge toll on the family. And once again, this was already a year and a half, going on a year and a half after the war started. It was a terrible, terrible thing. I'm pausing for 1 second. If I had told you, right, that there's a connection between PTSD and Shiva Nekiim, you'd be like, what's the connection, right? But a lot of times those connections, you can't imagine them. You have to see a real case to understand what a connection could be. Here, the issue of the 7 clean days was a block for the ability of this individual with PTSD to re-enter his family, to re-enter his reality, to start to heal, for the whole family to start to heal, right? And that was, in this situation, a problem. So he asked me, his wife told him to call me, to ask the Shaila whether or not she could go to mikvah without the 7 clean days, meaning just 7 days after she started seeing her period, and when she was clean, to go and to go to mikvah, what we call today nida deoraita. Would that be possible? I felt like this was out of my depth. I certainly didn't want to pass it on my own. I called several poskim and asked their opinions. I don't have their permission to say who they were, so I'm not going to tell you the names. But I called several poskim to ask a shayla on this and to see whether it was possible. I got a range of opinions. At the end, what I told him, according to one of the poskim that I consulted with, was that she can go early to the mikvah, but not for full sexual relations, just for hugging, kissing, that sort of thing that they could have. There could be negia, etc., but not full sexual relations. But once again, right, what is going on here? This is what's important for me to convey to you, right? Is that if we think that someone with PTSD is going to come back from a war or something along and just slide right back into their lives without some sort of measures that we're going to put into place to allow that to happen, to smooth the transition, a lot of times we're going to find we're wrong about that. And mamash families depend on this. So we need to understand that we need to find ways for those things to happen. Questions?
Rabbi, hello?
Yes, go on with that. I know my father was Rabbi. He was in World War II. But 44 months, the almost were getting things. We couldn't imagine how bad that was. But how do you get that before? And yet, in that home, our country is known for its security. So, what is the whole
There were also I think right. They just called it something else. There were definitely people who had, etc. You're right. It wasn't as developed as, my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. Was there PTSD from the Holocaust? Of course there was. Was it noticed? Was it, did people just assume, oh, they'll just keep on with their lives, they'll come to America, they'll build it up, so somehow they'll do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, my grandparents came, here, and they somehow rebuilt their lives. But later on in life, my grandfather used to tell us about some of the years, which were really, really bad for him, et cetera, et cetera. And he didn't call it PTSD, but I would call it PTSD or depression or a lot of other things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So just because we don't have percentages, right, of people who have PTSD from the Holocaust, doesn't mean that there wasn't. It just means that we didn't call it that.
You had a question. Nathan, you have a question?
Sorry.
Yes, I do have a question. Rabbi, can medication help with OCD?
Yes, there is OCD medication. There is such a thing. Yes, absolutely. And it's important to know that. So if people have OCD, like I said, there are many good avenues, including medication that can help them. Absolutely.
Do you know the name of one or two
medications? I don't remember right now, but it's easy you can just look it up. It's easy to look up and find out.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Was there a final question?
Yeah. World War II, soldiers that returned were heroes, and that helped them reintegrate.
Okay.
But after the Vietnam War, they were shunned.
Right.
And so it was much more.
100%. That's a good point. Very good point. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
We have 10 men that washed. Or need bread.
I watched this.
Nice. Do me a favor. This will probably help that.
We got a bench, gentlemen. We got a bench. Rabbi. We have a minion. 6 p.m.
77. Would you raise your hand if you ate bread? We have seven. Oh, yeah, we're good.
Amen.
Tomorrow's share will only be on Zoom. There's a bris here in the shul tomorrow, so we're only going to be on Zoom.
Mandy,
Yes.
it sounds a little like OCD to me.
Okay.
Just kidding. Don't take any meds.
I never do.
Okay.